The cameras were already rolling. The signing pens were laid out on polished wood inside the White House. Journalists from around the world had gathered outside for what was supposed to be one of the most important diplomatic announcements of the year. 11 months of negotiations, nearly $480 billion on the table. A framework designed to reshape energy trade, critical minerals, manufacturing, and agriculture across North America. And it was gone in less than 15 minutes. This is the Global Report. Tonight, we take you inside the Oval Office the day everything collapsed. Before we continue, we want to hear from you. Do you believe national dignity should come before economic gain, even when billions of dollars are at stake? Drop your answer in the comments right now. Tell us where you are writing from. We read every response. The agreement had been months in the making. Economists on both sides of the border viewed it as a potential turning point in North American relations. The proposed framework covered energy exports, critical mineral supply chains, auto manufacturing, agricultural trade, digital commerce, and a binding dispute resolution system specifically designed to prevent future tariff battles. Businesses had been waiting for this moment for years. Investors were watching. Governments across Europe and Asia were watching. And for a brief window that morning, it appeared that the waiting was finally over. Then the two leaders sat down. According to multiple officials familiar with the meeting, President Trump opened the conversation by making clear that Canada needed the deal far more than the United States did. He reportedly described the agreement as proof that American pressure tactics had worked. He framed the moment not as a partnership between equals, but as a concession extracted from a weaker side. Sources say the tone inside the room changed almost immediately. Canadian officials later described Prime Minister Carney becoming visibly and deliberately silent as the conversation continued. By the 12th minute, things took a decisive turn. According to accounts now circulating among diplomats and journalists in Washington, the president suggested that Canada should be grateful for the deal. He implied that the economic relationship between the two countries was not a relationship between equals. That was the line. What happened next has already become one of the most discussed moments in international diplomacy this year. Witnesses say Prime Minister Carney quietly closed his briefing folder. He stood up from his chair. He looked directly at the president, and he delivered 7 words that are now being repeated in political circles around the world. He said, "You just paid full price for nothing." Moments later, he walked out of the Oval Office. His delegation followed. 11 months of negotiations ended in less than 15 minutes. Inside Washington, reaction was immediate. Officials scrambled to understand whether the walkout was a tactical maneuver or a complete collapse. Within hours, it became clear. Canada considered the agreement dead. The signing ceremony was canceled. Reporters waiting outside were told no joint appearance would take place. And financial markets began responding almost instantly. Do you think Prime Minister Carney made the right decision by leaving, or should both leaders have kept negotiating despite the tension? Share your view in the comments below. This story is already raising serious questions about diplomacy and leadership at the highest level. President Trump responded publicly later that day with a sharp press conference. He accused Carney of disrespecting the United States and damaging Canada's own economy. He insisted the American negotiating position remained strong. He suggested additional tariffs could follow if Canada continued what he described as hostile behavior. Over the following hours, a series of social media posts from the president escalated the dispute further, transforming what had already been a diplomatic crisis into a global political spectacle. Canada chose a different approach entirely. Prime Minister Carney did not address reporters immediately. After returning to Ottawa, his government released a brief and carefully worded statement through the Foreign Affairs Ministry. It confirmed that Canada had suspended negotiations following remarks that undermined the principle of equal partnership between democratic allies. It warned that retaliatory economic measures were being prepared. Those measures arrived 2 days later. Canada announced targeted tariffs on key American agricultural exports. It suspended several informal energy export commitments that had been maintained throughout the negotiation period. It paused regulatory approvals tied to major American investments in Canadian resource projects. And Canadian officials confirmed they would begin discussions with European and Asian partners to explore broader multilateral trade arrangements. The message was clear: Canada was not waiting to be called back to the table. The economic consequences were immediate and significant. Markets in both countries fell sharply. Analysts say more than $100 billion in combined market value disappeared in a single trading session. Shares in manufacturing, agriculture, transportation, and energy companies all declined as businesses confronted the possibility that trade uncertainty between the two countries could extend for years. For economists, the most damaging element was not the tariffs themselves. It was the collapse of predictability. Business leaders had hoped the proposed dispute resolution mechanism would prevent sudden trade actions and give companies the confidence to invest again. Instead, the breakdown reinforced the deepest fear in boardrooms across North America. That political tension could disrupt cross-border commerce at any moment, without warning and without recourse. Manufacturing groups warned the collapse could delay investment decisions and threaten jobs tied to North American supply chains. Agricultural organizations expressed serious concern, particularly in regions heavily dependent on Canadian markets. One industry representative described what happened as a preventable crisis driven not by policy disagreements, but by a failure of basic diplomacy. The political reaction inside the United States followed quickly. Early polling suggested many Americans viewed the breakdown as avoidable. Independent voters expressed growing concern about how the administration handled the final stages of the negotiation. Even some Republican lawmakers from farming and manufacturing states acknowledged frustration publicly, warning that prolonged trade conflict with Canada could further damage local economies already under strain. The Canadian public reaction was strikingly different. Polling and commentary across the political spectrum suggested most Canadians viewed the walkout not as a rejection of economic cooperation, but as a defense of national sovereignty. Former Canadian officials argued that accepting the reported remarks would have carried political consequences far beyond any trade agreement. The 7 words Carney delivered were widely described in Canadian media as the only appropriate response. Interestingly, the Canadian dollar strengthened against the American dollar in the days following the incident. Economists said the shift reflected growing concern about political instability surrounding American trade policy, rather than confidence in the economic confrontation itself. Markets were pricing something specific: the judgment that Canada had handled the moment more effectively than Washington. The international reaction added another layer of pressure. European and Asian governments watching the negotiations reportedly viewed the collapse as a warning. Officials in several allied countries privately questioned whether major agreements with Washington could hold if personal dynamics between leaders carried so much weight in the final hour. Some European officials began discussing new mechanisms for future American negotiations, specifically designed to reduce dependence on personal relationships between heads of state. Those discussions remain preliminary, but the fact that they are happening at all says everything about how closely the world watched what happened in that room. Third question of the evening. Do you think America's closest allies will trust future negotiations after this incident? Or will they become more cautious when dealing with Washington? Tell us your view in the comments. Your location and background matter to us, so please include them when you post. What makes this moment so consequential is not just the economics. It is the image. A foreign prime minister walking out of the Oval Office during the final stages of a completed agreement is one of the rarest things in modern diplomacy. It does not happen between allies. It does not happen after 11 months of painstaking negotiation. And it does not happen unless a line has been crossed that cannot be quietly ignored. Carney did not hold a press conference. He did not release an angry statement. He did not trade insults publicly. He simply stood up, said 7 words, and left. And in doing so, he communicated something that no prepared speech could have delivered more clearly. Some things are not for sale, not even for $480 billion. Whether you view the walkout as an act of principle or a costly diplomatic gamble, the outcome is the same. An agreement that could have reshaped North American trade for decades is unsigned. $100 billion in market value evaporated in a single session. Businesses on both sides of the border are recalibrating their plans, and 2 governments that share the most integrated economic relationship in the world are now further apart than they have been in a generation. Behind closed doors, diplomats are reportedly working to prevent the situation from deteriorating further. But neither government has announced any path back to the table. Trust between the 2 sides has been severely damaged. And trust, unlike tariffs, cannot be removed by executive order. The long-term impact on America's global reputation may be the most consequential dimension of all. International negotiations depend as much on predictability and consistency as on economic leverage. If foreign governments conclude that agreements can collapse in a single conversation because of the personal tone of a single leader, they will seek stronger institutional protections before sitting down with Washington again. That shift, quiet and gradual, is already underway. The story we witnessed today was not really about trade policy. It was not about energy or minerals or agriculture. It was about something more fundamental: whether power, properly applied, can substitute for respect. Whether the largest economy in the world can demand gratitude from a partner it calls its closest ally. Whether 7 words spoken quietly in a room can carry more weight than $480 billion laid out on a table. Tonight, those questions have no final answers. But one image will endure: a nearly completed agreement sitting unsigned on the Resolute desk. A room that fell silent in a matter of minutes. And a prime minister who walked away not in anger, but in the kind of deliberate, calculated calm that tells the watching world exactly where the line is. In modern diplomacy, respect is sometimes worth more than negotiating power. And once trust is broken, even the most valuable offer can disappear in an instant. If this kind of analysis is what you have been looking for, subscribe to the Global Report right now and hit the bell icon. We publish twice a week. We go further than the headlines every single time. You will not want to miss what comes next. This is the Global Report. The story behind the story. Every time.